of their own mental health, right? We're often concerned with law enforcement and the impact of things that they see on a day-to-day basis. You know, they are exposed to traumatic situations, and how might an 18-year-old be able to handle that?
And she said that could have ripple effects, which would undermine lowering the age requirement.
We could see high rates of burnout and turnover, which is not going to solve the staffing problem. They're going to spend money investing in someone who may not stay for the long haul, and that's going to be an issue.
Ultimately, Kalika Cox said she understands why the change was made. She says, "We know that the New York State Department of Corrections is understaffed. They've been dealing with issues and trying to recruit new staff and trying to maintain staff. She estimates that they've lost 4,000 officers, plus 2,000 that they fired during the strike. So it's left them in a very precarious situation, right? Where the safety of residents and staff is now a big concern. But she's not sure that reducing the age to 18 is the way to handle that. Cox thinks what should have been done is to talk to existing corrections officers to find out what they need to do that job and hopefully retain a more mature staff."
All right, Maud, thank you so much.
Thank you. For many foreign investors and businessmen, getting a green card through the EB-5 investor visa program seems to be a no-brainer. But is it really that simple? And what are the consequences for current EB-5 applicants?
Uptown Radio reporter Joya Ma asks an immigration lawyer and interested applicants about the process.
Royal Sun is a graduate student studying nutrition at Columbia University. She wanted to stay in the U.S., but her current F1 student visa expires 60 days after graduation. The most common option is to apply for an H-1B visa as a foreign worker. But only about a quarter of all the graduate students who applied actually end up with a visa. Another option that Sun preferred is the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Program, where a visa may be granted after investing at least $800,000 in a business in the U.S., a business that creates at least 10 jobs.
We are preferred to spend some money to application with the process of EB-5. So usually we call this process buy the green card rather than get the green card by ourselves.
Sun was interested in the hotel industry and was planning to invest $800,000 in a new hotel. But she feels that even making that upfront investment, the chance of getting an EB-5 visa remain uncertain.
Really not for sure, only like maybe half, 50%.
And why is that?
Because of the overall environment of economic in the US, which is not good after the COVID-19 pandemic. I think everybody knows that economic conditions, which is really not good. That's why the investment take a lot of risk.
Gadi Zohar is a managing partner of Zohar Law, a firm in New York specializing in immigrant visa issues. He says the current changes in the requirements for the EB-5 have also made it harder for many immigrants to obtain the visa.
When they changed the amounts a few years back from $500,000 to $800,000 and $1,050,000, it kind of weeded out a lot of the people. So it's really only the people that have that income to be able to afford the EB-5 visa.
And even if the immigrant has those funds back home, it can be difficult to spend that money on businesses in the U.S.
And especially lately, a lot of countries, it's hard to get those funds out. So they're working through intermediaries or working through other people. And it's just getting harder and harder to kind of track the source of funds. Also, for applicants, it's hard finding a project. Most don't do it through direct investment. They invest through a regional center. And the regional centers, it's a difficult situation on evaluating where to invest in.
Recently, another visa option has been introduced by the Trump administration. It's called the Gold Card, and it allows for permanent residency in the United States for an upfront payment of $5 million to the government. Zoha says He says this program is simply out of reach for most AB5 applicants.
Getting $800,000 to $1,050,000, that's still doable for a lot of people. $5 million is very difficult, especially when it's $5 million that you're basically investing in the US, giving it to the US, and you're not getting any return on it. I don't think it'll impact the EB5 investors because it'll be for people that really have that disposable wealth.
Although full details for the Gold Card program haven't yet been announced, Zoha says he expects that the total number of green card issued will remain the same, and that would also affect current EB5 applicants.
Because it takes those number of green cards out of the EB5 program and into the Gold Card program.
Sun, meanwhile, has decided to change her plans. She won't be investing in the hotel or applying for a visa to stay after graduation, at least not now. She says President Trump's actions in the tariff war with China and consistently shifting plans lowered her expectations and motivation to live in the U.S.
Because the relationship between U.S. and China, which is not good this year. So I think probably I will still come back to China, come back to my hometown and continue my future life and find my future job in China.
We still interested in EB5 in the future?
Yeah, I'm interested, but right now I think it's not a good time to application that.
Sun says she's applied for the job at the hospital in Shanghai, her hometown, and she's currently waiting for an interview. Drama, Columbia Radio News.
Next up, we hear a commentary from my co-host, Anna Weaver. She talked about her love for live music and how concerts have brought her closer to her dad.
Tonight, I'm about to go to my 100th concert, give or take. But I still remember my first concert more clearly than my first kiss. Almost every moment of my childhood was soundtracked by my dad's iTunes library of about 3,000 songs. While flipping pancakes on the weekend, he would hit shuffle on a chunky old MacBook, filling the house with the Beatles' trumpets or Neil Young's harmonica. I never got tired of his music, but I did get curious as to what else was out there. I eagerly tagged along on trips to the library, sifting through the CD bins. When my family downloaded Spotify in 2011, I quickly found a new artist to obsess over. Her voice was unlike any other I'd ever heard. One day in 6th grade, I sat on my bungee chair staring at the walls I had just painted bright purple. My dad came in and asked, if you could see any artist in concert, who would it be? Ellie Goulding, I replied without hesitation. He pulled out the Seattle Times and pointed to a listing for a concert date only a few weeks away. It was at the Paramount Theater, which is one of the oldest venues in Seattle. I was in awe of its ornate gold ceiling and our proximity to my idol, which wasn't actually that close, but it felt like the best seat in the house. Ellie's first song echoed through my bones, and again later in my ears as I tried to fall asleep that night. My dad didn't know any of her songs, but he danced with me anyway.
I was afraid it was just gonna be a bunch of little girls or whatever. But the show itself, it was super cool. She had this authentic way that she felt like she could connect with the audience. That's what I remember the most. And then I remember the hit song.
Some say the way to measure a true friend is if they'll pick you up from the airport. I say the next best measure is if they'll go to a concert with you for an artist they don't know very well. My dad was my first concert friend, but he certainly wasn't my last. When COVID hit, I realized how much I missed being surrounded by thousands of other people, screaming the words along with the singer on stage. Concerts were also an excuse to get off my suburban college campus. When a cross-country teammate asked me if I would see Tame Impala with her at the Hollywood Bowl, I practically frothed at the mouth. Unlike going to the airport, attending a concert is hardly a burden. But I must admit, over the years, the excitements of concerts dimmed, and then not-so-nice parts began to stick out. Like standing for hours without a bathroom break, getting pushed over in the crowd, or somehow always being stuck behind a group of 7-foot-tall basketball players. Which is all the more reason why a concert friend is necessary, to offset those parts and remind you later of all the great things you witnessed. Today, I live 3,000 miles away from my dad, But I am roommates with that same college teammate, and she's the epitome of a concert friend. We each buy pairs of tickets without asking the other, so our calendar is packed with a financially irresponsible number of concerts. In October, we saw a band headed by Bono's son, and I barely knew a song. A week later, she joined me to fulfill a childhood dream. At Madison Square Garden, she danced as I sung along to Cyndi Lauper's Money Changes Everything. The tickets were a birthday present from my dad. The costs of housing in New York City are notoriously high, and added on to rents are fees paid to brokers who handle the apartments. These fees can be surprisingly high.
But starting this June, the cost of renting through brokers will be limited by law. Madeline Riley reports on the possible effects of the new rules governing broker fees.
Currently, when you rent an apartment in New York City through a broker, the broker charges a fee that the tenant pays. This fee can range from 1 month's rent to 15% of the rent for the entire year, paid up front with the signing of the lease, along with first and last month's rent. The result can be surprisingly a high cost. Janaya Jubek is a broker in New York City.
There was rather an infamous ad out on Street Easy earlier this spring that advertised for, I think, a rent of $2,000 for a rent-stabilized apartment, a $9,000 broker fee right in the listing. So that type of activity, they're being transparent about the expected fee, right? But I think that the FAIR Act is really looking to target these potential larger fees.
These kinds of brokers' fees can be a significant burden and hurdle to finding a living space in the city. In December, the City Council passed the Fairness in Apartment Rental Expenses Act, or the FAIR Act, to try to limit the cost of brokers' fees charged to tenants. When the law goes into effect in June, renters will no longer be directly charged for their fees. Jonathan Miller, a real estate market analyst and appraiser, questions the economics of the new rules.
The perception with the FAIR Act is that the tenant won't have to pay that fee anymore. The idea is that the tenant is going to save a lot of money because they don't pay the fee. But that is inherently false because that's not how markets work.
Miller says, while the FAIR Act will limit brokers' fees, the costs may still find their way to the renter.
If the tenant no longer has to pay the real estate agent for their services, then what this law does is effectively make the landlord pay that fee. The landlord is not going to eat the fee. So what's going to happen is that the rental prices will go up about the same amount as the additional costs they're going to incur, and that's going to become the new market level.
Another possibility after the FAIR Act goes into effect is that landlords will simply cut brokers out of the equation, preferring to market the apartments themselves. Jubek says she and other brokers currently offer centralized listings of large number of apartments.
This new FAIR Act would therefore affect the apartments that I'm able to advertise. So the apartments that I currently advertise that would require any clients of mine to pay a fee, I would no longer be able to advertise.
Jubek says it's possible there could be a shortage of listings, as brokers will work solely through referrals with particular landlords. Jonathan Miller agrees that the rules may have uncertain consequences.
So effectively, the tenant is paying the same. I have no opinion of whether this is better or worse than the old way. It's just from an economic standpoint, this doesn't save the tenant or the renter any money.
The FAIR Act will go into effect in June, if it can survive court challenges. The Real Estate Board of New York, which represents brokers, sued to block the law back in December. Meanwhile, tenants advocacy groups say They're waiting to see what the effect of the new rules will have before they take action. Madeline Riley, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. There is more to come. Stay with us.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Hannah Weaver.
And I'm Modiaish. Up next, Bronx community activists march against the stigmatization of HIV and other illnesses.
Reporter Una Milliken reflects on her fashion choices over the years, but whether her hair is pink or blonde, she's realized some things always stay the same.
Later in the show, hear my story about the impact of drug advertising on American health. This story and more coming up.
For Columbia Radio News, I'm Caroline McCarthy. Pro-Palestinian protesters at Columbia University stormed Butler Library yesterday, leading to 78 arrests and injuries to 2 campus safety officers. All of the detained have been released as of this afternoon. More on that in a moment. A New York appeals court has upheld a law shifting many local elections to even-numbered years, aiming to boost voter turnout and reduce cost. But the law has led to pushback from Republicans, who sued to block it, saying it violates the state constitution and that it could give Democrats a partisan advantage in higher turnout election years. Mayor Eric Adams announced that Albany lawmakers have passed amendments to the state's involuntary commitment law, a move he has long advocated as part of his subway safety plan. City officials say legislative language will be updated to clearly define who qualifies for involuntary commitment. Brian Stetton, a senior advisor in the Adams administration, says any person who is not meeting their basic human needs of food, clothing and shelter, and medical care would qualify. The city also unveiled a historic $32 million annual investment in the Department of Sanitation as part of what Adams calls the best budget ever. The money will fund enhanced litter basket pickup and expanded park cleaning shifts across the city. A federal judge has temporarily blocked the Trump administration efforts to withhold funding for housing assistance across the country, including for thousands of New York City families. That's according to local officials and court records. New York, among 7 other jurisdictions, sued the administration in Seattle District Court last week, alleging the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development had tried to restrict millions of dollars in grants by making cities agree to not promote DEI initiatives, gender ideology, or sanctuary immigration policies. And real estate executives have donated at least $400,000 to Andrew Cuomo's mayoral campaign through the Political Action Committee Fix the City. Those same executives are currently being sued by the city under the Adams administration. The lawsuits against these landlords were filed by the city's Department of Housing Preservation and Development over their alleged failure to correct dangerous conditions in apartment buildings they own or manage. It's currently 76 degrees and partly sunny in New York City, but expect clouds and scattered thunderstorms to roll in this afternoon with a high near 78. Heavy rain is likely overnight and into the weekend, raising concerns for flooding. So stay alert and have your umbrella handy. For Columbia Radio News, Caroline McCarthy.
Pro-Palestinian protesters stormed Butler Library at Columbia University yesterday, occupying a reading room and refusing to leave upon university request. The situation escalated on campus, and nearly 80 protesters were arrested and detained by NYPD. And 2 campus public safety guards were injured during the crowd surge. Our reporters Caroline McCarthy and Anna Weaver report on what campus looks like today.
At Columbia University's Morningside campus yesterday afternoon, NYPD helicopters and unconfirmed drones circled overhead. Protesters clashed with NYPD officers inside Butler Library and beyond campus gates on Broadway, leading to 78 arrests and 2 campus security officers injured. But today on campus, things feel a lot different. Students are lounging on the lawns and graduation tents are being set up. In the library, students are back to studying for finals, which start tomorrow. Dasan Abdul is a sophomore at Columbia. He was in the reading room yesterday when protesters entered. I met him outside that same reading room today.
I thought it would end pretty quickly, but it lasted a lot longer than I thought, and then security started closing the doors, which is when I tried to leave the room. They were like fighting with security to keep the doors open, and security's trying to slam it shut, pretty aggressive on both sides. I think that's when it felt very serious, because there was a huge crowd starting to accumulate outside the doors, and then they were yelling out from the windows.
Dasan thinks the situation may have widened a divide between students on campus, those who support the protest and those who don't.
I also think a lot of students feel alienated from the cause now because of the way they went about it. I think it's fine to encamp outside or something, but I think disrupting a reading day is pretty unfortunate for the whole student population.
Other students are concerned that graduation ceremonies might be disrupted. Nathaniel Worth is a graduating senior.
I think it's going to be similar as to last year, especially given the fact that you can invite whoever you want, and that kind of leaves the door open for inviting people that may or may not be allowed on campus. Students may tear up their diploma or say something on stage. But I hope that everyone just kind of wants to graduate and have a memorable moment and not bring world issues into it.
Samantha is an international student at Columbia. She's opted not to use her real name for fear of retribution from the university and the current administration. She says the protests weren't as disruptive as made to seem.
The disruption that was happening was on the 3rd floor, limited to one room. And I really strongly believe that the reason that it caused disruption to the rest of the building was because public safety intervened so violently. And I think that the rhetoric that the administration and our president are using, as well as the way some students are feeling very uncomfortable about having lost a few hours, maybe an afternoon of studying during finals, and feeling like it's really unfair, I think is really wrong. I think that losing a few hours of studying compared to what is happening in Palestine and Gaza is just not comparable.
For Columbia Radio News, I'm Caroline McCarthy.
ZJ Young contributed to reporting.
This morning, members of the Bronx community joined together, marching to end stigmatization against HIV and other illnesses. Reporter Flora Warshaw has the story.
Down on East 166th and the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, a group of people are gathering from different community-based organizations. Housing Works, Bronx Care, the HIV Planning Council are among many preparing to march all the way down to the Bronx Courthouse, where they will be meeting the Bronx Borough President, Vanessa L. Gibson, and hold a rally to raise awareness.
Bronx, are you ready?
Yes, we are.
Bronx, are you ready?
Fire up and ready.
The representative for the Bronx Borough President, Rafael Gomez, spoke about the awareness that is needed for HIV medical care.
The Bronx is one of the most diverse communities that we have here in New York City, but along with that diversity also comes a lot of different stigmas. So we need to ensure that our community is aware and our community-based organizations can provide more personalized care so that way we can make sure that we break those stigmas.
When the initial cases of HIV emerged in the 1980s, very little was known about the disease. There were no tests or treatments, and most patients died within months of displaying their symptoms. A lack of understanding surrounding this disease meant there was wide-scale stigmatization. Yet despite breakthroughs in treatment that now mean people can live with HIV, many still suffer from the same stigmatization, as described by Charmaine Graham, the coordinator of today's march.
Now we have medication, and people can go and get their treatment, and they can live a normal life. There are people who stigmatize individuals by avoid using utensils. They feel like if they touch people, they can get HIV, and we know that can't happen.
People can now live a normal life because of medicines like PrEP, which is a daily medication that significantly reduces the risk of HIV transmission from sex or injection drug use. But in the Bronx, a report released in 2022 showed the borough had the lowest rate of new patients taking PrEP. The community also has the largest rate of new diagnoses compared to other boroughs. In recent months, access to PrEP has decreased because of the Trump administration's decision to halt all global health funding, including PEPFAR, back in January. PEPFAR is a US government initiative aimed at addressing the global HIV/AIDS epidemic. Emma Curtis, a member of Housing Works, says it's really important for people to get the HIV care that they need.
Since PEPFAR has been paused, so many people have been dying because they haven't been able to get the treatment that they need, and we're trying to make sure that they get their treatments so no one else has to lose their lives.
PEPFAR accounts for more than 90% of PrEP initiations globally.
So all of our care in Puerto Rico and Haiti, they're not getting any of their medications.
And what about in the States?
Same with the States, it's mostly paused.
From here all the way to Puerto Rico, HIV is a global issue. So for now, the community here in the Bronx will keep fighting for awareness. Flora Warshaw, Columbia Radio News.
With 1 in 3 Americans struggling with their mental health, it's not surprising that more are seeking talk therapy. But now, along with conventional therapy, there are also new digital tools to support mental health.
These are becoming increasingly popular. One therapy chatbot, PI.ai, has more than 1 million daily users. Some human therapists and researchers use AI as a helpful tool, while others remain unconvinced. Una Milliken has more.
To explain what AI therapy is, I asked ChatGPT. In 2 sentences or less, what is AI therapy?
AI therapy uses artificial intelligence to provide mental health support, like chatbots.
The idea of AI in therapy actually isn't that new. In 1966, an MIT scientist created a program called ELIZA. ELIZA was featured in a BBC report on new technologies, talking with a mock female patient.
Well, my boyfriend made me come here.
Your boyfriend made you come here.
He says I'm depressed much of the time.
I'm sorry to hear that you're depressed.
Today, AI therapy is a bit more advanced and becoming a lot more commonplace. Nicholas Schork is a researcher at the Translational Genomics Research Institute.
In fact, there's a whole area, commercial development, product development, on what are called digital therapeutics. So digital therapeutics are therapeutics you can implement over an iPhone.
AI therapy is already an increasingly popular alternative to human therapy, and it's a rapidly growing industry. Some people turn to ChatGPT out of necessity, like this user, who agreed to speak under the condition of anonymity.
I've been through a few therapists. I've had like 5 of them now, I believe, but I just didn't feel like any of them were able to get to the bottom of whatever was bothering me.
He says he uses ChatGPT to work through his anger issues.
I was hurting myself with anger. And then after all the discussions, I just don't have that anger there anymore.
Walter Matweychuk is a clinical psychologist and a professor at NYU. Matweychuk often uses an approach called rational emotive behavior therapy, which he says AI could possibly learn to perform.
I'm pro-humanity, so if it helps them, it's a good thing. But I don't know how well it can help them at the current state.
Some therapists have embraced the technology. Brian LeBaron is a licensed mental health counselor in New Jersey. He says he uses AI during sessions, evaluating patient conditions and developing plans for treatment.
What I found was sometimes people would present with a certain problem. I would go into ChatGPT on my own computer on the side, so to speak, and write a prompt about their problem.
No way am I going to do that.
Jennifer Warner is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in PTSD treatment. She says AI can't do the long-term work of unraveling deep trauma. She recalls one case where her patients were unaware that they had trauma at all.
It took us 2 years to talk about that, but I remained aware of it. Very few people want to acknowledge that they have experienced trauma, will call it trauma. They think it's a bad word, and so they don't always even know that that's why they're coming to therapy. That isn't something that can just be, I think, sussed out by a machine.
Warner works with a lot of patients that have been hurt badly by other human beings. She is worried that these people might turn to AI instead of putting their faith in other humans like herself.
I'm your therapist. I am here in your best interest. I am a safe person. I am a place for you to come and maybe learn new things and talk to and build safe relationship with, and trust that you will not be hurt. But when that's, mechanized, it's so sad.
Some providers are worried about the larger social impacts of AI therapy. Victor Schwartz is a psychologist, professor, and the dean for wellness and student life at CUNY School of Medicine. He says he could see AI being useful for immediate and short-term situations like suicide prevention. But Schwartz says he doesn't know how effective it would be in treating other mental health issues. He points to a growing loneliness epidemic in our country. For people that are already socially isolated, talking to AI could make them more closed off.
In some ways, it feels like putting a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage. And maybe you don't see the blood in the same way, but it doesn't seem to be addressing, and in some ways maybe exacerbating, the underlying disconnection and isolation that people are feeling.
There aren't a ton of rules regulating AI therapy, but that's changing. In January, a bill strictly limiting AI in therapy passed the Illinois House. And the American Psychological Association is urging the Federal Trade Commission to monitor the AI industry more closely. For now, though, the use of AI within therapy remains up to the individual therapist and the patient seeking help. Una Milliken, Columbia Radio News.
You may be used to seeing drug ads everywhere on TV, in the subway, or on social media. From Ozempic to Wegovy, those names are probably familiar to you. But for my French co-host Maud Yesh, drug ads are a whole new experience. In France, prescription drug ads are not legal. And last December, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the American Secretary of Health, called for a ban on ads for drugs in the U.S. So reporter Maud Yesh looked into the impact of these ads on Americans' relationship to health.
I landed in the US last September and went to visit my uncle in Chicago. One night, we were just chilling on the couch, flipping through channels, and there were so many commercials for drugs. They claimed they could fix everything from depression to diabetes. Each problem had its own pill.
I got the power of 3. I lowered my A1C, CV risk, and lost some weight.
So I talked to my doctor. She told me I could build on my wins without changing my antidepressant.
Rexulti.
I needed more from my antidepressant.
I was like, wait, what? In France, where I'm from, we don't have this. And in fact, there are just 2 countries in the world, the US and New Zealand, where drug advertising is allowed. Here in the US, you do not just see some ads, but on average 9 drug ads a day. And last year, pharmaceutical companies spent $4 billion on these ads. There are so many ads. So I wonder, do they shape who you trust, who you fear, and what you believe health and disease really are? I went to Washington Square Park, where I asked dozens of New Yorkers what they think, and they shared their insights.
I think what you remember is diarrhea, vomiting. You remember sort of the most horrific things that were said, and you forget what the name of the drug was or what it's used for.
They're just promoting and marketing their drugs, whether they're good or not. You don't really know if they're working drugs. They're just trying to sell.
It's because they can say it can result in death, but you can also vomit. So it's like, I don't want either of those things.
But no answer to my question yet. So I started to read academic research. And it turns out these ads do impact your relationship to your health. The first way it does is through a concept called medicalization. That's when normal life stuff gets treated like a medical problem. Feeling down after a bad week? Instead of waiting it out, you're told you need a pill to improve your mood. David Hertzberg is a professor of history at the University of Buffalo. He specializes in pharmaceutical advertising. And he explains the ads are working. Even if you think you're guarding against their effects, they still work because you are not feeling well, you are suffering and searching for any solution.
They teach the lesson that health is about drugs and that to be healthy means picking the right drug, which is obviously not what most physicians would tell you about how to be healthy.
He gave me one example from the 1950s during the women liberation movement. It's a black and white ad in a magazine. It shows a young housewife and she looks miserable.
She looks like she is behind the bars of a prison, but the bars are made out of brooms and mops. And she is in a kitchen, and it says, the tagline is, you can't set her free, but you can make her feel less anxious.
It looks like she should take a break from housework, but the ad tells her to take a pill. And that leads to another effect of drug ads. Hertzberg says they don't only just tell you pills are the solution. They also want you to believe you should be the experts on your own health, which has contributed to a growing problem you have in today's America. It can lead to a distrust of doctors and medical experts.
It creates a backlash against the very idea that there could be something called disinterested expertise of someone who simply wants to know what is the best way to deal with this problem. Many people have reached a place where they do not believe it is possible for such a person to exist.
According to Hertzberg, Americans' reluctance today against vaccines can be directly related to this. Professor Dominique Tobel is an historian of medicine at the University of Virginia School of Nursing. She agrees with Hertzberg that ads can contribute to this idea that we are all potential patients. But she also thinks pharmaceutical ads can be helpful. But here's the surprising thing. Tobel says this rise in drug ads was actually a result of patient activists in the 1960s, demanding more information and access to expertise about their own care.
Pharmaceutical advertising has been a way and continues to be a way in which Americans get information that may be important to their own health. And it's an important way for them to learn about the products that may help them manage their symptoms and treat illness. And they might even help motivate patients to seek care from a health professional.
Like in the 1950s, after the thalidomide scandal, which was a sedative given experimentally to pregnant women to treat morning sickness. Hundreds of babies were born with short limbs. Patients began demanding answers.
Collectively, these groups argued that patients should have access to the same information about prescription drugs as physicians in order to exercise their autonomy and be able to play a greater role in medical decision-making.
Patients began demanding answers. Then, in the 1960s, women's health movement was pushing for better information about birth control.
I think the time has come when women have got to find self-respect and a full identity of their own.
So women's health activists called on the FDA to make available to patients information about the risks of prescription drugs, including oral contraceptives, primarily through the inclusion of patient package inserts. And we see these still today. If you get a prescription, you'll get oftentimes quite a long sheet that includes all the information, safety information, side effects, and whatnot.
There have been multiple attempts to limit those drug ads. They have mostly failed, often because of free speech laws. Drug ads are a type of commercial speech. They are protected by the First Amendment. But Robert Kennedy Jr. continues to say he wants to ban them. As for me, this summer I'm going back to France, and for now I'll continue to go to my doctor to get information about pharmaceutical drugs. Modiaish, Columbia Radio News. When Una Melikan was younger, she switched up her look a lot. But, as she found, it didn't fundamentally change anything.
When I was younger, I was really cool. I had pink hair. I had green hair. I had an undercut, which is kind of when you shave one side of your head. For listeners that are in the know, I had the same haircut as the DJ Skrillex. I grew up in Stockholm, Sweden, but my parents are both American. I'd gone to the same school my entire life, and I was kind of unsure of where I fit into the social hierarchy. I wasn't particularly pretty or cute. I was pretty good at school. I was fairly good at sports, but not a standout in either. I turned to alternative fashion. I became obsessed with Tavi Gevinson, a young blogger who made a name for herself in the fashion world at 12. She was my age. She mixed prints that clash. She wore heavy dark eyeliner. She wore a huge bow on top of her head made out of plastic. I wanted to be her. So I tried my best. I started my own blog. I started wearing black eyeliner. I wore platform shoes with cheetah print and red laces. I wore ripped jeans and stuck out my tongue in photos. I I even stole a cigarette from a family friend and smoked it covertly without anyone knowing. I kind of had a bit of an edge. People talked about me. They thought I was weird, sure, but I was surrounded by kids I'd been in school with for years. My friend Vendela might not have understood my new look, and Alexandra side-eyed some of my more daring outfits, but I still hung out with them every day after school. They even came with me when I shaved my head, even though they thought it was hideous. When I stopped by my next-door neighbor's, Ben and Tira's apartment, Ben still made me carbonara with peas, just as he had before my hair was pink. He wasn't even phased. He thought it was cool. Then I found out that my family was moving to Louisville, Kentucky. I don't remember it, but my dad tells me that when I heard about the news, I screamed. After a long time abroad, he wanted to return to the States and he'd found a good job there, so it was understandable, but it was a hard move. At my new middle school, the emo kids didn't understand why my hair was parted in the middle. They had deep side bangs instead. And the preppy kids thought we were both weird. I hated Kentucky. Being the weird kid was no longer fun. No one bullied me. No one was mean to me. I just had no friends. I decided to return to my age-old strategy. Change my look. I shed my cool kid persona. I dyed my hair blonde. I bought boat shoes, which were the rage at my southern school. I picked up white, lacy blouses and tennis skirts, and I started wearing regular blue jeans without holes or scribbles on them. I desperately wanted it to work, but even with my new hair, new shoes, and new clothes, I was more miserable than I'd been before. I didn't magically make new friends or land a spot in the in-crowd. It sounds so corny, but looking back, it didn't really matter what I looked like. I didn't have the neighbors and friends that I'd grown up with. Vendela and Alexandra weren't there to go shopping with me. They also weren't there when I dyed my hair blonde, and I didn't know my new neighbors. I wish I could say I had this realization at the time, and I returned to my alternative style. Showed up at school with a shaved head, ripped jeans, and black eyeliner. I didn't. It took me a while to figure things out. Today, I have my own style. It's not alternative, but it's definitely not preppy either. I never went back to platform shoes or white lacy tops. But I'm happy to say today, when I want to go shopping, I have amazing, lovely friends who will go with me.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our foreman today was executive producer Joya Ma. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Madeline Riley.
Special thanks to our senior editor Dana Binfet and director Hannah Lorenzo, who coordinated our studio production with Ona Milliken.
Thanks to our newscaster Caroline McCarthy and our day reporters Flora Warshaw and ZJ Young.
Our instructors Sally Herpish and Ben Shapiro and Priscilla Alabi advised our staff. I'm your host, Modia Ish.
And I'm your host, Hannah Weaver. Uptown Radio is live on Thursdays at 4 at any time at uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.